The Marriott hotel lobby was buzzing with activity as our extended family gathered for my cousin Rachel's wedding reception. 3 generations of Martinezes filled the elegant space, everyone dressed in their finest attire and eager to capture the perfect family photos. I stood at the edge of the group wearing a simple black dress, watching my relatives arrange themselves by some invisible hierarchy I'd never quite understood. The successful ones positioned themselves prominently in the center. My uncle Roberto with his construction company, my cousin David with his real estate business, my aunt Carmen who'd married a surgeon. "Okay everyone, let's get some nice family photos before we head into the reception," announced my mother, directing the group like a seasoned photographer. I moved toward the back of the group, my usual position in family pictures. Not because I was shy, but because experience had taught me that my presence was often seen as awkward by the rest of the family. "Luna, step out of the photo," Mom commanded without looking at me. "You'll ruin it." The words hit like a physical blow, even though I'd heard variations of them throughout my life. Too tall, too serious, wrong clothes, wrong expression. There was always some reason I didn't fit the family's vision of itself. "Mom, I'm part of this family too," I said quietly. "Of course you are, Mija," she replied with forced patience. "But this is for Rachel's wedding album. We want it to look professional." Uncle Roberto nodded in agreement. "Luna, you understand. This is a special occasion." I stepped aside and watched as my family arranged themselves in the perfect shot. Successful relatives in front, their well-dressed children positioned strategically, everyone smiling with the confidence that comes from knowing you belong. What they didn't know was that I'd just returned from New York, where I'd spent 3 days in photo shoots for Business Journal's annual CEO of the Year issue. What they didn't know was that the magazine featuring my face and company story was probably already on newsstands across the country. What they didn't know was about to change everything. As I stood outside their perfect family portrait, I reflected on how I'd become the family outsider. While my cousins had pursued traditional paths, marriage, children, conventional careers, I'd spent the last 8 years building a technology company from my garage. Data Flow Solutions had started as a simple idea: help small businesses manage their inventory and customer data more efficiently. Working 18-hour days and living on ramen noodles, I'd developed software that could streamline operations for restaurants, retail stores and service companies. My family had watched this journey with a mixture of confusion and concern. When I dropped out of my master's program to focus on the business, they'd been horrified. When I moved into a studio apartment to reduce expenses, they'd assumed I was failing. When I declined family vacations and social events to work on product development, they'd decided I was antisocial and irresponsible. "Luna's going through a phase," Mom would tell relatives. "She'll settle down eventually." But I hadn't been going through a phase. I'd been building something extraordinary. 3 years ago, Data Flow Solutions had landed a contract with a major restaurant chain. 2 years ago we'd expanded internationally. Last year we'd gone public with a valuation that made me one of the youngest female CEOs in the tech industry. My family knew none of this because they'd stopped asking about my work years ago. When conversations turned to careers and achievements, they focused on David's real estate deals or Carmen's husband's medical practice. My technology company was dismissed as playing with computers. "Getting a real job would be good for you," Dad had suggested at last year's Christmas dinner. "You can't run a hobby business forever." The hobby business had generated $847 million in revenue last year. Now, standing in the hotel lobby watching my family pose for photos that deliberately excluded me, I felt the familiar sting of being deemed not good enough for their vision of success. But unlike previous family gatherings, this time I had something they didn't know about: the build-up. After the family photos, we moved into the reception hall where round tables were decorated with flowers and candles. I found myself seated at table 12, far from the head table where the bride's immediate family held court. My tablemates were distant relatives and family friends I barely knew. The conversation centered on safe topics: the beautiful venue, Rachel's dress, the quality of the food. No one asked about my work or life, which had become the standard approach to dealing with the family anomaly. During dinner, I watched the head table where my parents sat with their siblings, all of them discussing their children's achievements with obvious pride. David's latest real estate development, Carmen's daughter's acceptance to medical school, Roberto's son's promotion at the engineering firm. And what about Luna? I heard Aunt Rosa ask during a lull in the conversation. Oh, Luna's still doing her computer thing, Mom replied with a dismissive wave. She's very independent. The way she said independent made it sound like a character flaw rather than a strength. Uncle Roberto leaned in. Is she still single? She's what, 31 now? 32, Dad corrected. And yes, still single. Too focused on work to find a husband. That's unfortunate, Roberto continued. A woman needs stability. She can't live in apartments and play with computers forever. I excused myself from my table and stepped onto the hotel's outdoor terrace, needing air and space to process the familiar frustration. Below me, the city lights twinkled in the darkness, including the illuminated sign of my company's headquarters just a few miles away. My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant. Congratulations on the Business Journal cover. It's already trending on social media. The phone hasn't stopped ringing with interview requests. I smiled, knowing that tomorrow would bring a flood of media attention and speaking opportunities. The tech industry was celebrating my company's innovative approach to data management and my leadership in the field. Business schools were requesting guest lectures. Investment firms were analyzing our growth strategy. But tonight I was still just Luna, the family disappointment who didn't fit in their photos. When I returned to the reception, dessert was being served and the DJ was encouraging people to dance. I rejoined my table where the conversation had turned to vacation plans and home renovations. Luna, you should come to our timeshare in Cabo next month, suggested one of my distant cousins. It might be good for you to relax and get away from work stress. I appreciate the offer, but I'll be traveling for business. Oh, where to? London first, then Singapore and Tokyo. We're expanding into Asian markets. The conversation paused as my tablemates processed this information. International business travel didn't fit their perception of my small computer hobby. That sounds expensive, someone said finally. Are you sure your little business can afford that kind of expansion? Before I could answer, commotion erupted from the hotel lobby. Voices were rising and I could see family members gathering around something near the front desk. What's going on out there? Asked one of my tablemates. We all turned to look through the glass doors separating the reception hall from the lobby, where a crowd of my relatives had formed near the hotel's magazine rack. That's when my stomach dropped. Business Journal's latest issue had just been delivered to the hotel newsstand. The revelation. The crowd in the lobby was growing larger, with family members pointing and gesturing excitedly at something on the magazine rack. I could see Uncle Roberto holding up what was clearly a copy of Business Journal, while others gathered around him with expressions of shock and confusion. Let's go see what all the fuss is about, suggested my tablemate, and our entire table got up to investigate. As we approached the lobby, I could hear fragments of animated conversation. That can't be right. Are you sure that's her? The same Luna who lives in that tiny apartment? Mom was standing in the center of the crowd holding the magazine with shaking hands. Dad stood beside her, reading over her shoulder with his mouth hanging open. Step out of the photo, you'll ruin it, Cousin Maria was saying, mimicking Mom's earlier command. Maybe we should have let her stay in the picture after all. I pushed through the crowd until I could see what they were looking at. There, on the cover of Business Journal, was a professional photograph of me in a navy business suit, standing in front of my company's logo. The headline read, CEO of the Year. Luna Martinez's Data Flow Solutions revolutionizes small business technology. The subtitle continued, How a 32-year-old dropout built a billion-dollar empire from her garage. Uncle Roberto looked up from the magazine and spotted me in the crowd. Luna, is this really you? The crowd parted as family members turned to stare at me, their faces showing various combinations of shock, confusion, and embarrassment. Yes, I said simply. That's me. Aunt Carmen stepped forward, still trying to process what she was seeing. But this says you're the CEO of a billion-dollar company. I am. Data Flow Solutions, Dad read aloud from the magazine. Annual revenue of $847 million. International operations in 12 countries. Employs over 3,000 people worldwide. He looked up at me. This is your computer hobby? This is my company. Mom finally found her voice. Luna, why didn't you tell us? This magazine says you're one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the country. I tried to tell you. Every time I mentioned my business, you called it playing with computers. When I talked about international expansion, you suggested I get a real job. When I explained our software solutions, you changed the subject. The lobby had gone quiet except for the background music from the reception hall. The magazine says you're worth $400 million personally, Aunt Rosa said, having taken the magazine from Roberto. And you live in that small apartment? I choose to live simply. My wealth is mostly reinvested in the company and charitable foundations. Uncle Roberto stepped forward, his voice full of newfound respect. Una, I had no idea. We all thought. You thought I was a failure because I didn't fit your definition of success. But why keep it secret? Mom asked. We're your family. We should have known about your achievements. You didn't want to know, I replied. You wanted me to be something I wasn't. When I chose a different path, you excluded me from family events, family photos, family conversations about success. I gestured toward the magazine. This recognition didn't happen overnight. I've been building this company for 8 years. During that time, how many times did any of you ask about my goals, my progress, or my dreams? The silence that followed was heavy with uncomfortable truth. Cousin David, who'd always positioned himself as the family's business expert, cleared his throat. Luna, I have to ask. When you were at family dinners and we were discussing investments and business strategies, I was listening to real estate agents and small business owners give advice to someone who runs a company worth more than all your businesses combined. And you said nothing? Would it have mattered? You'd already decided I wasn't worth including in those conversations. The aftermath. The reception continued, but the energy had completely shifted. Family members who'd ignored me all evening were suddenly eager to talk business strategy and investment opportunities. Relatives who'd pitted my lifestyle were now asking for career advice and job opportunities. Luna, we had no idea, Mom said for the 10th time. We're so proud of you. Are you proud of me or proud of what I've accomplished? The question hung in the air between us. What's the difference? She asked. The difference is that I was the same person yesterday when you excluded me from family photos. The only thing that's changed is your knowledge of my net worth. Dad approached with the magazine, which had been passed around the entire reception. Luna, this article mentions your charitable work. It says you've donated $50 million to education programs. Education for underprivileged kids who might not otherwise have opportunities. And the workforce development programs? Training programs for adults transitioning into technology careers. Why didn't you tell us about any of this? Because every time I tried to discuss my work, you treated it as unimportant. When I mentioned hiring employees, you assumed I meant part-time help. When I talked about company growth, you thought I meant getting more clients for freelance work. The wedding photographer approached our group. Excuse me, I couldn't help but notice the magazine. Would you like me to take some family photos with the CEO of the year? The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Actually, I said, I think we have enough family photos for tonight. Over the following weeks, my relationship with my family slowly rebuilt itself, but on entirely different terms. They treated me with a respect that had been absent for years, but I knew it was largely due to my financial success rather than any fundamental change in their values. Uncle Roberto offered to help me invest in real estate. Cousin David suggested business partnerships. Aunt Carmen asked if I needed a family doctor for my employees. Everyone wanted to be part of my success story now that they understood its magnitude. But the damage to our relationships was permanent. I'd learned that my family's love and acceptance were conditional on their understanding and approval of my achievements. When my success didn't fit their narrow definition, I became invisible. The magazine cover had made me visible again, but it had also revealed the superficial nature of their support. 6 months later, at the next family gathering, I was prominently featured in every photo. My opinions were sought on every business discussion. My achievements were celebrated and shared with pride. But I never forgot the hotel lobby moment when they excluded me from their perfect family portrait, only to discover that the woman they deemed unworthy of their photos was deemed worthy of a magazine cover. The woman they told to step aside so she wouldn't ruin their image had just been named CEO of the Year by one of the nation's most prestigious business publications. And sometimes, that kind of vindication is worth more than any family photo. The magazine cover changed everything, but not in the way my family expected. While they scrambled to reposition themselves in my success story, I made a decision that surprised them all. I established the Martinez Foundation for Technology Education, funding coding boot camps and entrepreneurship programs for young women from families like ours. Families who might dismiss their daughters' ambitions because they didn't understand them. The foundation's first scholarship recipients included a teenage girl whose parents wanted her to become a nurse instead of pursuing computer science, and a young mother who'd been told she was too old to learn programming. At the foundation's launch event, I gave a speech about the importance of believing in potential even when you don't understand the path someone chooses. The audience included venture capitalists, tech industry leaders, and policymakers. It also included my family. Mom and Dad sat in the front row, listening as I spoke about the danger of narrow definitions of success and the importance of supporting dreams that don't look familiar. Sometimes, I told the audience, the people who love us most can't see our potential because it doesn't match their vision of achievement. But that doesn't make our dreams less valid. After my speech, Mom approached me with tears in her eyes. "Luna, I'm sorry we didn't see who you really were." "You saw exactly who you expected to see," I replied. "That's the problem." The relationship with my family improved, but it took time and conscious effort. They had to learn to value me for my character, my determination, and my vision, not just my bank account. And I had to learn to forgive them for not seeing my worth before the world did.